have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much.
各位女士、各位先生，大家午安，欢迎参加争取国际金融智慧城市开发商机说明会。Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Seeking Smart City Business Opportunities in International Financial Institutions. We are very honored to have Mr. Thomas Maier, the founder of INFEN to Taiwan. 首先，请今天的主办单位外贸协会严明化副处长来为我们致辞。First of all, we would like to welcome the Executive Vice Director of TAITRA, Ms. Patty Yan, to give us the opening address.
Ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Thomas Maier, the founder of INFEN. Good afternoon. On behalf of TAITRA, I want to extend my warmest welcome to all of you and also our speaker, Mr. Thomas Maier. Okay, and Thomas Maier, he is not just the founder of the INFEN, and also he was formerly the managing director of Infrastructure Business Group in EBRD, the position he had for 10 years. And I believe today's from Mr. Maier, his speech, he will give us the insight of the business opportunity in smart city. And also he will share his experience to all of you. And so Mr. Thomas, please allow me to say some words in Chinese to welcome our guest. OK， 各位先生、各位女士，大家好。首先代表外贸协会欢迎大家参加我们今天的一个研讨会。那根据这统计资料来显示后，我们大概全球在1950年代，大概我们在城市人口的一个统计占有率大概30%。那到2014年，就是在人口就是都市的一个统计资料，大概会占54%。那未来在2050年的时候，就是在都市的部分人口比例也会占比到70%。那这代表什么？这代表越来越多的人口它是集中在一个城市里面。那这样的一个状况以后会造成很多的一些问题会产生，例如会有空气污染，会有一些资源的一个短缺。那这些的问题会产生之后，各国政府为了解决这样的一个问题，它必须要利用一个smart city 的一个建造，来建制更一个好的一个城市的环境给所有的一个都市的人民。那这也就是为什么在近几年来，很多的一个国家，它慢慢的在开发所谓的智慧城市这一块。那智慧城市这一个部分以后就会有相关的智慧的交通啦、金流、物流、医疗以及安控的一个部分的一些商机会产生。那台湾的部分，我们都知道，台湾的厂商它的强项，我们就是在这些solution 啊，还有 smart city 的这些一个环境的一个商机，会是台湾厂商的一个强项。但是呢，在面对这个国外的很多这些政府的一个标案啊，或者商机出来的时候，厂商他所要解决的就是金融资金的一个问题。所以这也就是为什么今天外贸协会我们请到了那个 Thomas Maier 来跟我们分享一下，大家可以如何运用这个国际金融机构的这些，例如说是欧银啦、EBRD 啦、开发银行、亚洲银行、非洲银行这些银行的一些资源跟资金。那我们今天很高兴，其实那个 Thomas Maier 他就是这一方面的一个专家、一个翘楚哈。那他在欧银的部分担任基础建设总处的一个处长，也有10年以上的经验。那今天他会跟各位来分享，就是说大家怎么样运用这样的一个资源哈，来未来可以从事这个政府采购的一些商机的开发。那外贸协会，因为我们在全球有60个驻点。那我们也很欢迎，就是大家可以多利用外贸协会的各方面的资源，不管是在驻外单位的部分，或者是需要我们总部这边行销专案处这边的任何的一个协助跟资源，都欢迎随时来跟我们来联络哈。那大概今天就是简单的这一个欢迎词，那相信大家在这下午的这几个小时会有很大的一个收益。那再次的欢迎大家，也希望今天可以收获满满。谢谢大家。
谢谢严副处长，请副处长留步。 Mr. Maier, we would like to take a photo, so please come forward and take photo with Ms. Patty Yan. And 有其他厂商想要一起合照吗？我们欢迎前往舞台。大家可以一起，没关系。现在为演讲时间。Now let us welcome Mr. Thomas Maier to start the seminar.
Okay, brilliant. No, just put it on. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you here in Taipei, and I would like to thank you, Ms. Yen, for the invitation by TAITRA to make this presentation. Now, you know, Taiwanese enterprises are world-class in smart city technology solutions, and when you look at the statistics, you see that Taiwan is a leading exporter into the United States, Singapore, Germany, and other European mature markets, the United Kingdom. And what I would like to show you is perhaps another world that is out there and not yet of such importance to Taiwanese companies, which also provides interesting business opportunities in smart cities, and that is the so-called emerging markets. Of course, beyond mainland China, where you are extremely active, or Vietnam, where you're already quite active. And in this context, I want to use the time today to draw your attention a little bit to the opportunities that international financial institutions could play for you as partners, both in the financing of projects, but also as a source for consulting and works opportunities for your companies. And the presentation has 9 parts, and in which I cover more or less the main aspects of smart city development, the challenges and the possible roles for IFIs. And then in the second part of the presentation, I try to explain a little bit the inner workings of an international financial institution on, by example, of the EBRD, because I worked there for many years as managing director, and so I have a fairly good understanding of what an international financial institution can offer to the Taiwanese industry, and likewise what they cannot do. First of all, the importance of emerging markets. When you look at the statistics, it's quite interesting. These are the 2018 numbers of the IMF, and they show that in this year already, emerging markets provide 60% of the GDP in the world. That by itself is not a surprise, because China has grown quite significantly over the last few decades. But what is also interesting is that 80% of growth in the future, 80% of the GDP growth in the world in the future will come from emerging markets. likewise, or in reverse, only 20% will come from mature markets. And this shows to you how important emerging markets will be in the future, because that's where things will happen. And then, of course, in addition, when you look at the current trade disputes between the United States and everyone else in the world, it's clear that it's good for Taiwanese enterprise, like for any other enterprise, to look at diversification and trying to open markets that you haven't perhaps been in before, to be less dependent on single markets where political events or other events could derail business development. A second aspect here is the importance of cities in this in emerging markets. And again, you know, when you look at these statistics, which have been provided by McKinsey, you see that 600 of the largest cities in the world account for almost 50% of global GDP growth. And together with large, these are just the mega cities, and with the larger cities, 2/3 of global GDP growth is generated by 2,500 cities. So again, you know, the main driver of growth is emerging markets, and within that, it is the cities that drive this growth and therefore the business opportunities. And another figure which you may be well aware of, McKinsey estimates that in cities alone by 2025, $10 trillion of physical infrastructure investment has to happen to continue to make these cities livable and deliver services to its increasing populations. But at the same time, it's clear that physical investments alone need to be combined with smart city approaches to deliver optimal competitiveness of the city economies within a globalized and increasingly fractured and globalized world, better quality of life for the people that live there, avoidance of congestion, for example, improved environmental conditions through pollution reduction, and then, of course, also, and this is very important globally for all of us, cities are the main area where climate change mitigation will have to happen for planet and mankind to continue to thrive. Now, when we look at smart cities, you know, let's look first at the kind of a definition. I think we all agree that smart city could be defined as an integrated concept to enhance competitiveness and quality of life by applying real-time urban data analytics, using the Internet of Things, and other data-driven solutions to improve efficiency, reliability, and quality of urban infrastructure and associated public services for users. And I think this definition that at least was used in EBRD when I was there focuses on really 4 core elements. Competitiveness, quality of life through better services, environmental improvement, and climate change mitigation. And again, encompassing those drivers that I just alluded to. And but, you know, so far so good. We all agree on the definition, and that it's a worthwhile thing. But the key problem in the market, in emerging markets, and many of you have your own experiences there, it's very clear that there are significant institutional and regulatory challenges for basically 3 reasons. You know, the first one is the emerging market cities and central governments often have a weak capacity to plan for smart city solution. It's probably fair to say that most, if not all cities, have some notion of what a smart city solution could look like, but they don't have the institutional capacity for policy frameworks and to translate policy frameworks into notions of workable plans that you can actually implement and deliver for the citizens. And then secondly, while many smart city investments may be intuitively the right investment areas for city authorities, the economic and tax base in emerging markets in particular dictate that there have to be realistic investment priorities and that there needs to be a credible interaction between the authorities and the citizens to achieve political and social agreement on what should be done first and then second, and also, you know, with the Internet of Things and data collection and data sharing, how these data transparency and policies then are implemented. If you don't do that, you will never get citizens to agree what really needs to be done, and when the next city government comes, plans will be completely revamped. And this is exactly an area, these two areas is exactly where international financial institutions can be helpful, and I'll try to explain why. Now, first, here you have a list of just the main international financial institutions. As you can see, there are already 20 international financial institutions that are active in the world. You need to add to this another 20 or 30 or so of smaller institutions and bilateral organizations such as the European KfW, FMO, French development agencies, and so on, and OPIC, and so on and so forth. So there are quite a large number of these organizations around. And what is important here is to note that many of these organizations are committed to supporting the aims of the Paris Climate Agreement, and to varying degrees have an ability to support city governments, not just in the financing of investments, but also in advice on policy, regulation, and project preparation. And of course, that in itself requires these international organizations to hire consultants to deliver these services. And this is something that might be interesting. And then secondly, you know, when you look as a long-term investor in these cities, having an international financial institutions backing up city government in devising a coherent long-term policy will make it easier for you as an investor to take the plunge and actually engage in a PPP or in a private sector data solution or whatever it may be. Now, I want to focus a little bit on what a best practice IFI could do for Taiwanese companies. You know, first, I have to be clear that there are differences between the various financial institutions. Some of them are closer to this ideal than others, but I think all of them, at least to a varying degree, can provide their clients with technical assistance in developing and implementing smart city solutions. And as I said, this creates significant consulting opportunities, particularly for Taiwanese companies, because, again, you are the world leader in smart cities and energy efficiency solutions. And it's impressive what you have done. And I've just come from an event this morning where colleagues from Indonesia, from Thailand, and some other countries listened to what the colleagues of the FETC had to say about traffic management and the highway system here. And in EBRD, in my time in EBRD, I could send countless delegations from cities around the countries that EBRD operated in here to Taipei to learn from the counterparts here how smart city solutions and smart national solutions could look like. What international financial institutions can also do is mobilize private sector expertise and capacity in implementing solutions, generating PPP and other investment opportunities. And some Taiwanese companies are pursuing these opportunities quite successfully and aggressively abroad. And I think, again, there are a lot of opportunities, some of them higher risk, but well worth looking at. What is also clear is that international financial institutions provide long-term financing, making infrastructure solutions viable. When you look at the colleagues of the Asian Development Bank or the bank I work with, the European Bank or the European Investment Bank, the World Bank, the loan tenors are very long, you know, sometimes up to 25 years, making heavy infrastructure investments viable for the clients. And that is something that could be attractive, because if you go into these markets and you are a PPP partner, you need to have long-term funding. Many of the IFIs are now increasingly also tasked with crowding in private finance. In the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, that was the core of our business, because we were set up to do just that. But even the Asian Bank, that was solidly focused on public sector business, has in recent years established a private sector department, which is increasingly active, at least in the energy sectors across Asian countries. And then what is also important is that most IFIs, not all, but most IFIs, have a transparent and life cycle-based public procurement solutions policy. And some have no eligibility restrictions, which makes it possible for Taiwanese companies to participate in tenders. For example, in EBRD, there are no eligibility restrictions, so Taiwanese companies routinely participate in tenders, and for both works, but also for services and consulting. And I think this is an important aspect and the first step for companies to test the market, to operate for an international financial institution, and then if things work out, they can take the plunge and do more things in the countries. Now, in EBRD, the smart city focus has been quite varied and comprehensive, because smart city is a catch-all for a service city that delivers smart, energy efficient and green solutions for its citizens. And there are very many aspects here, from energy efficient buildings, public buildings, hospitals, schools, and so on, to traffic control and integrated transport concepts, including in particular smart card solutions that you are very, very good at here, you know, fostering an integrated transport solution, integrated emergency response systems, electronic tolling, whether it's ETC or peak pricing, parking management and control, LED lighting, again an area where the Taiwanese companies are excelling, and smart and integrated fleet management for public and private sectors, and smart street cleaning and sanitation. These are sort of core areas where an international financial institution such as EBRD is active when they look at municipal and city investments. And please remember again, most IFIs are tied by the Paris Climate Accord. They have to deliver on that accord. And so, for example, in EBRD, there is a target that 40% of all loans and investments are directly climate change mitigation relevant. And 40% is a lot when you talk about $10 billion a year of investment in this area. Now, you know, for EBRD in particular, there has always been a specific focus on environmental improvements, and some of you know this because EBRD was set up in 1991 after the collapse of the communist system, or the Soviet system, to bring the countries of Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union into the world economy. And one of the legacies of the Soviet system was hugely energy inefficient systems. So in 1991, a typical industry steel production in Ukraine would use 10 times more energy per unit of output than a modern plant elsewhere in the world. And so for EBRD, energy efficiency was always at the top of the agenda, because that was a key element for bringing clients towards a state where they could compete globally in the world market. Now, the EBRD smart city approach, you know, is similar to those employed by other international financial institutions, and basically can have three building blocks. The first one is the development of a smart city strategy. You know, given the institutional weaknesses and challenges that exist in emerging markets, EBRD has spent, with the help, for example, of the Taiwanese government and with other donor governments, significant resources on helping clients to define priority smart city strategy investment areas, because there is no one-size-fits-all that works for everybody, but these things have to be designed on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the institutional status of a city. Some cities are more advanced than others, its financial capacity, and then the way in which its citizens feel the priorities should be set. Then the establishment of a smart city open data platform, because of course smart city means the use of the Internet of Things, which in itself generates a lot of opportunities but also issues, and cities have to understand what they can and what they should not be doing in that regard. And then lastly, of course, like any other bank, the finance of smart city building blocks, both through financing the projects themselves, but also mobilizing consultants to deliver the implementation of these smart city building blocks. Now, in the last part of this presentation, I just wanted to introduce to you EBRD a little bit. It may not be that relevant if you work only in South Asia, but it gives you an idea generally of how these international financial institutions work, because the way EBRD is governed, its shareholding structure, everything is pretty similar to what you would see in other banks, such as the Asian Development Bank, even the AIIB that was created a few years ago, and so on. Now, the shareholding structure. As you can see, an international financial institution is in a sense a state-owned enterprise, because it's owned not by private shareholders but by governments. And in the case of EBRD, it's 66 countries and 2 intergovernmental institutions, the European Union itself and the European Investment Bank, that are shareholders. You can see that the major Asian shareholder is Japan, but then there's also Korea, and the People's Republic of China, since I think 2015, is a small shareholder in EBRD. EBRD, like most other international financial institutions, is AAA rated. In other words, it has the highest credit rating that you can achieve in international markets. That is driven by the fact that it has that international financial institutions have a very conservative lending policy. They generally cannot leverage very much. In the case of EBRD, our capital base with retained earnings over the years, EBRD makes a net profit per year of about $1 billion, is now 41 billion, and EBRD at any point in time cannot lend or invest more than 41 billion. So it's a one-on-one leverage, extremely conservative, because a commercial bank could go 1 on 100 or something like that. But that ensures that an institution like an IFI remains AAA rated even if things go quite bad. The biggest shareholder in EBRD is the United States with 10%, and then the EU countries, not the EU but the EU countries, together have about 60%. That excludes the United Kingdom, you know. So if you added the United Kingdom, it would be 67 or 68%. But let's see what happens there, you know. Yeah. In terms of sector coverage, it's a pretty standard coverage that IFIs have. You can see them here. In the case of EBRD, there are 12 subsectors. What's perhaps more important is what EBRD is not doing. EBRD is not doing financing of military equipment, gambling, all the bad things in the world, you know, strong alcohol and stuff like that. But anything else that is good for the economy and good for social cohesion, EBRD does. And as I said, 12 sectors: manufacturing and services, municipal infrastructure, local infrastructure, transportation, financial institutions, which means bank, non-bank financial institutions like insurance, natural resources, telecoms, property, power and energy, and agribusiness and industry and commerce. Now, in the case of EBRD, the product palette is quite broad. EBRD can do loans, can make equity investments, can be your equity partner if you invest, can provide guarantees, i.e. not funding direct, but can guarantee providers of funding. What is perhaps also interesting is EBRD is very good in providing local currency funding. So even in more difficult markets such as Kazakhstan or Turkey, the majority of the lending is done in local currency, which avoids foreign currency risk and really helps foster transactions that stand up to robust credit scrutiny. But what is also important is, and I alluded to this before, lending or investing, providing funding is one thing, but also EBRD is providing a lot of technical cooperation to enable its public sector counterparts to develop the right projects. But I'll come to that in a minute. Here you can see a little bit the evolution of the business in the last 6 years. Debt is by far the biggest instrument, more than 80%, but equity 16% and guarantees around about 5%. Net profit 0.8 billion, which is roughly $1 billion US. And it's a partner. IFIs are partner that remain in the countries even when the going gets tough. You know, very often when you work with commercial banks and there's a major crisis in a country, you see that the banks retract because they are not comfortable anymore with the risk. international financial institutions, in a sense, have a counter-cyclical mandate. When things get particularly tough, they are tasked to stay and support local enterprise, not, so to speak, run away. And that is something which makes IFIs extremely interesting in volatile situations. Here you can see the EBRD country coverage. You know, when you remember those 20 international financial institutions, there are very few that are operating globally. It's the World Bank, the IFC that are operating globally, but everyone else is operating regionally. And in the case of EBRD, the original area was the former Soviet Union. But then in later years, because of the success of the operating model of EBRD, Turkey became a country of operation, because Turkey has never been part of the communist bloc. But they thought that EBRD projects would be useful to them. After the Arab Spring, some of the North African countries joined EBRD. And it's not many years away when the whole of the Mediterranean Rim will be part of the EBRD countries of operations. What is interesting also is that following the debt crisis in the EU, Cyprus and Greece have been added to the operating countries of EBRD. Not sure whether that is a big business opportunity or a big headache, but you now have quite a large coverage. But again, you know, the fundamental point is each international financial institution has a regional specialization, and that's where these IFIs can operate. A lot of the countries we share with the Asian Development Bank. You know, everything that is yellow, for example, is shared with the Asian Development Bank, and then the Caucasian countries, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. These are also countries where the ADB operates, and of course the AIIB operates in Turkey, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus as well, and so sometimes you have the interesting situation that several regional IFIs work in the same area, providing oftentimes complementary but sometimes competitive products. Now, why should these countries be of interest to you, really? You know, it's different language, different culture, difficult background, post-communism, and so on. Why should they be interesting? Now, these figures are a little bit older now on GDP, but they do provide you with sort of a rough idea of why it could be interesting to work in EBRD countries, because the combined GDP of EBRD countries is around $3 trillion US. And you compare that with Vietnam, for example, 215 billion, or Thailand about 400 billion. You can see that it's not a small market to look at. Of course, it's much more fragmented because you have a couple of big countries, Turkey, Russia, Egypt, but then you have a lot of smaller countries. But nevertheless, I think it just gives you an idea that there are maybe quite significant business opportunities. And particularly when we look at smart city and energy efficiency solutions, always remember those countries that you see here, yeah, are still extremely energy inefficient, and smart city solutions do have not just a feel-good impact, but they are a necessary part of making these economies globally competitive, and therefore there is a real interest of everybody for Taiwanese enterprises to engage. Now, when you then break down the EBRD countries, I've listed here a little bit sort of the fundamental facts. I don't want to get into those in great details, but it is really clear that there are significant opportunities. You know, in Central Asia, it's partly driven by the Belts and Roads Initiative, but much more important, for example, in Kazakhstan, they do have a green economy plan, which they want to implement by 2030, and that in itself generates significant opportunities. And in EBRD, for example, we have, thank you, in EBRD, for example, we have by now 12 cities in Kazakhstan, we have smart city solutions, you know, integrated urban transport, energy efficient dual heating and power production, traffic management, whatever, you know, gas-powered buses. There are lots of opportunities that might be interesting for you. Turkey in itself, I mean, is a huge market. It has gone through a crisis, obviously, through you know, because neighboring Syria, the migration crisis and all that sort of stuff, the political shenanigans that are happening there. But the growth rebound is quite significant this year, and there will be a lot of opportunities. And since Turkey has a free trade agreement with the EU, one can use Turkey also as a production base and export into the EU without any penalties attached. Sorry. When we look at sort of some of the smaller areas, you know, again, some of these are interesting, and some colleagues, like Philip Chung of MyTAC, formerly of MyTAC, you know, unfortunately he can't be here today because he is in Bosnia, you know, working there. In this case, for EBRD as a small business consultant, and there are lots of opportunities, lots of smaller opportunities in these countries, and it might be really interesting for you to reach out and see what the opportunities are for Taiwanese business there. I think I skipped this. Then let me just very briefly update you on the key markets of EBRD. The first thing that you can see here is that each year there seem to be different top countries, yeah, and you know, because what you see there is the investment volume by EBRD. But add to that roughly 3 times more of private sector funding, you know, then you have the sort of the financing volume there. But in essence, it shows you that in 2016 and 2017, Romania and Turkey were very attractive markets for the private sector. And in Romania, you know, there are a couple of Taiwanese enterprises, for example, in recycling that are extremely successful there. But then what you also see is that countries are top of the list that you would not expect to be there. You know, like Egypt. You know, all we hear of Egypt is problems, and but underlyingly there are sound business opportunities. And Kazakhstan, you know, with all its post-Soviet legacy, provides a lot of opportunities, but of course also challenges, because we can't ignore the fact that many of these countries, shall we say, corruption and statism are still a serious hindrance for business. Turkey in particular for EBRD has always been a key country because it has a very strong industry, very strong construction sector and an economy which is really interesting. I mean, I need to point this out to you. Unlike some of the other, shall we say, countries that EBRD operates in, Turkish enterprise is very internationally orientated. They don't see Turkey as their territory where they don't let anyone in. For example, in Russia, it's very difficult as a foreign player to come in and really play a big role. You have to associate yourself or let yourself be dominated by a local player. That's the only way of getting business. In Turkey, they understand that business is a win-win, and they invite foreign partners in. And when I look at in the infrastructure sector, all the projects, all the major projects that happen there are projects between local and international partners, or sometimes just international partners. And that's something that is really interesting and reflective of the Turkish entrepreneurial spirit. That is very similar to what you have here. You do what makes sense, and you work with who it makes sense to work with. You don't say, "Oh, I don't like you because you are a foreigner." You like somebody if they have something to offer, and then you cooperate. And sometimes you go separate ways afterwards, but sometimes you foment this partnership for the longer term. Now, you have here basically the important contribution that Taiwan makes to EBRD's business model, because you have been, or the Taiwanese government has been one of the key contributors to EBRD's success. And I think, if my memory serves me right, by the time I left, Taiwan was the 3rd or 4th largest contributor to EBRD's technical assistance program. And you know, without technical assistance programs, we could not operate in these difficult emerging markets. And I'm really grateful for all the support that MOFA, TAITRA, all the institutions here have provided, both in monetary terms, but also in the opportunity for city administrations, national administrations, to come here to Taiwan and learn how it can work. And it's kind of interesting, you know, I mentioned FETC this morning. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we brought the Russian National Motorway Administration here to Taipei to talk to FETC to understand how to organize tolling. And you know, it's happening now. Unfortunately, with the Russian GPS system and Russian technology, but institutionally, you know, they borrowed one-on-one the ideas that you developed here and successfully implemented, and the Kazakhs are now following suit. And this is just one of the many examples where Taiwan and the Taiwanese government have played such an extremely useful and supportive role. But you also have provided lots of funding to green energy, to something called the Green Energy Special Fund, which is directly related to smart city investments and to small business, where a lot of Taiwanese consultants are making an everyday contribution, not just Philip, but many other important consultants from Taiwan. I mentioned the Green Energy Special Fund. It had a bit of a shaky and slow start, but it's now coming on, and we are now working together for, not we, EBRD and the Taiwanese authorities are working on a project in Amman in Jordan, on a smart city. The first sponsored LED project was in Chisinau, Moldova, and you have investments that are being considered in Bosnia, Moldova, Bulgaria, Kazakhstan, and Morocco. So things are moving in very many countries, and very many countries where you would not a priori think that they could be interesting, but they may well be. And I alluded to the fact that international financial institutions have a lot of public procurement opportunities. Now, EBRD, for example, is very private sector oriented, so the public procurement opportunities are relatively limited, and you can see here it's about €7.5 billion or $9 billion in the next 4 years. This is not a huge amount of money, but when you look at the Asian Development Bank, they have, I don't know, probably several hundreds of billions in procurement opportunities. And the interesting thing is with EBRD, for example, you have no eligibility restrictions. So whether Taiwan is a member state of this IFI or not, it doesn't matter. Yeah? Taiwanese businesses can bid for consulting, for works contracts, and can get supported with EBRD money in long-term investments. Now we do a lot of private sector investments with Singaporean companies. Singapore is not a member of EBRD, not a shareholder, but since there are no eligibility restrictions, we work with them. Similarly, Indian investors, when they do renewable energy in Georgia, for example, EBRD has no problems financing that. And I think some of the other IFIs, not all of them, but some of them also have a relatively loose eligibility criteria, which makes it possible for Taiwan to participate. And then, you know, because infrastructure is very much a business where the public and the private sector interact, this is also where you have most of the public sector procurement opportunities. The red area is the city area, and you can see that there's a lot happening there. It reduces over the years a little bit. This is not due to the fact that we do less. It's just reflective of the fact that within our countries that we have been operating, Turkey has been particularly active, and there we could implement quite a lot of private sector only solutions. So in relative terms, we didn't need to put so many public sector procurement contracts in while still doing a lot more business. But I would expect that the red bar to stay at least stable or grow slightly going forward. Here I list the EBRD procurement principles, but I think it's probably fair to say that these procurement principles are more or less the same for all IFIs. In particular, the World Bank Group. I cannot so much comment on what AIIB now has in terms of procurement, but they are aligned with WTO, whatever that means these days. And what is important is you have fair and open international tendering. There are no country eligibility limitations, nor are there any preferences. And I think that is important because in the World Bank, if my memory serves me right, sometimes they could apply local preference. EBRD does not do that, and most other IFIs don't do that. So that means that you as a Taiwanese company have a level playing field vis-à-vis local players as well. And I think I won't go through all of this, but obviously transparent life cycle-based procurement is what is key. If you are interested in opportunities, each IFI has their procurement department, and usually you just type in, and you know that probably from ADB procurement, and you will be guided to their website where the available works and services are. You can subscribe to email alerts, and it's the same with EBRD. You just click on that link, and then you see what's happening, both in terms of specific contracts that are up for tender at the moment, but also on a project basis. So you get an early alert if, for example, EBRD works on a smart city concept, shall we say, in Bucharest, Romania, and procurement will be in 2019 or 2020, but you will be alerted already to the possibility that EBRD financing may be made available for such a project. And it's all under the EBRD, in the EBRD procurement website. And now with this I would like to close. Here you have my contact details, and of course if you have any question, please do not hesitate to email me, and I will do my best in two respects. First, answer any follow-up questions that you have and that you don't feel you don't want to ask right now, but you want to reflect and ask that later on. Or if you would like to get in touch with the colleagues of EBRD for specific ideas, I can arrange and facilitate that contact for you. And lastly, I hope you found this talk interesting and useful, and I thank you for your patience, and I'm now open for questions from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Maier. 那接下来是 Q&A 时间，那请有问题的来宾就直接举手，然后我们工作人员会递上麦克风给您。Dear guests, we will open the floor for questions. Please do raise your hand so our staff can hand you the microphone. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Thomas. I'm the advisors of the EBRD, especially in smart city. I'm glad that you meet you here. Yeah, thank you very much. That's very helpful for to how to penetrate over the market. Especially in the infrastructure, and you managing director before. Okay, the question is how since you're here, how you can help the Taiwanese the solution providers, especially in the IoT smart city providers, how to with your help, how to the market or we can bid the tenders from the EBRD opportunity. Yeah, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. There are ex-colleagues of mine of EBRD here in Taipei, for example, at the Smart City event, as some of you may know. And in fact, they are speaking today and tomorrow there. Now, in general, I think EBRD is very focused on smart city solutions, as you well know, and this is why we have had a secondment program with Taiwanese industry for quite some years now, where Taiwanese experts are embedded in the city team, in the municipal team of EBRD, working with the EBRD bankers and sector experts in delivering solutions. And I think this is an area where Taiwanese enterprises simply have a cutting edge. And in my own experience, if I may be open, the problem that I see very often is twofold. The first is that companies from Taiwan feel that the markets that EBRD now operates in are too difficult compared to the traditional markets of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and China, mainland China. And company managements make the determination that it's not worth it. Okay, we should concentrate our firepower on Vietnam, on Thailand, on Indonesia, and not on Kazakhstan or Turkey or Egypt or the new countries of the European Union. So there's a priority issue problem. And the second one is of course, it's very clear. Culturally, it's much easier for you to go to mainland China. Same language, same heritage. You know, when you look somebody in the eye there, you understand what they want from you and what you can deliver and what you cannot do. It's much more difficult in these countries, but that's why EBRD can be so helpful, because we have I'm gone now for a year, but sometimes I get excited still. You know, EBRD has 45 offices in the countries. In the bigger countries, you know, not just one, but sometimes 2, 3, and more. And these offices are staffed not with representatives who represent, but with bankers, yeah, and with sector experts. And so, as you quite rightly say, you know, we have this smart city knowledge mostly in London, but it's now radiating out into all these offices. And so, when you want to know more about the opportunities in the Kazakh market, our offices in Astana, in Almaty, and I think we now have one in Karaganda. You know, they are very open to discussing with potential investors what the opportunities are, what the institutional, legal, and regulatory situation is, what the problems are. They can often advise on the quality of the local partners, you know, not to make too fine a point of it, but, you know, those guys you can work with and those guys you should probably stay away from, and so on. And this is sort of the value added that an IFI like EBRD can provide. It's for free, you know, there's no obligation, but it can generate a better idea for you whether it's worthwhile investing resources in developing a market. I don't know, from your own experience, do you have your own view on what EBRD could do in addition?
Yeah, I think that the great opportunity since you are here is we know that Taiwan have the great technology, especially just you mentioned smart city, whatever is from the transportation or from the infrastructure like the waters, the investment, etc. A lot of the application. I think that the great opportunity with your help. A lot of the solution provider can join together with the big job. I mean, especially a lot of the smart city project will going to be happening in the EBRD, for example, like from the Jordan. So as I know, I'm personally, my company is also the IoT solution provider. So we have the bunch of the relate to the friend that they are very interesting, just wondering how to get it, get in touch or a more helpful make it happen. You mentioned these two questions. It's mindset. So maybe with your help or some local people like us, that we can help work together and bring the older energy to solution energy or a lot of technology energy to can put in the MEI infrastructures and in the EBRD. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, the lady in the back
Hi, Mr. Maier. This is Jim from Nomura Research Institute, and I have one question. Would like to ask you that how EBRE do the business model with the local local business like Taiwanese companies. For example, that currently Taiwanese government actually have the official development assistant, which helps the Taiwanese companies go into the Southeast Asia. And I would like to ask how EBRD would help to these Taiwanese companies go to the above mentioned the emerging markets, and what you will provide for these Taiwanese companies to go into this kind of emerging markets better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's a very comprehensive question, because there are so many elements to this. As I just said, a key service function of IFIs should be to provide impartial information about local markets and opportunities to companies from Taiwan and from any other country. And this is why EBRD's offices, like all the other resident offices of other IFIs, are very happy to receive visitors who inquire about the business opportunities, number one. Number two, we work very systematically, I worked very systematically with TAITRA during my time in EBRD, and I will continue to work with TAITRA in the future to make sure that Taiwanese enterprises are made aware of the opportunities that exist in their non-traditional markets. I mean, I cannot tell you about the opportunities in Vietnam or Malaysia or wherever, but I have a very good sense of what's happening in Central Asia, Central Europe, and so on. And then, of course, once you have made a determination that you want to be active, both through procurement opportunities, but then also through the financial services that EBRD has at its disposal, and the IFIs have at their disposal in general, that can be made to work for a Taiwanese company as a foreign investor in these markets. And always remember, it's a bit like, the way globalized growth now happens is a bit like the smart city concept itself. 5 years ago, we would not have talked about smart city as a key driver of growth and opportunity, because it was just a woolly concept. In the same way, nobody could have foreseen 10, 15 years ago that 80% of GDP growth in the world would come from emerging markets. Yeah? I mean, the term emerging markets becomes increasingly obsolete because emerging markets have emerged. That's the reality. And but these markets do have specific challenges in terms of institutional maturity, corruption, insufficient legal and regulatory framework to fall back on, the absence of international arbitration, and all that sort of stuff that makes it extremely difficult for you to go there and say, hey, I want to invest my money. Because, those of you who are operating in Vietnam or Thailand, you know that it's difficult enough as it is, but you understand those markets. But when you go to these other markets, some of these issues may be even more pronounced, but that is exactly where international financial institutions can help you. Because always remember, when an international financial institution provides funding to a project, it rarely goes belly up, because the local government does not dare to play games with that company or project. Yeah? And that's part of why all the IFIs still have a AAA rating, because the default rate, yeah, is extremely low, because international financial institutions have this political, shall we say, political power vis-à-vis the host governments to enforce a contract to be observed and not broken. And that's the difference between an IFI and perhaps an ordinary commercial bank who may not have that political leverage. Any? Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Maier. This is Richard Huang from ECOF, a company doing investment and operation for Western energy projects. It drew my attention that you are talking about the political influence or political power for EBRD comparing to other commercial banks. For investment point of view, we care the interest rate. The interest rate, your interest rate is cheaper or commercial rate is cheaper. That involved in the project economics. So can you elaborate more about EBRD or IFI, your advantage or your disadvantage compared to commercial banks when we are doing, if we will have the opportunity to go to the area, the developing countries. The second question is, you mentioned EBRD is not only a lender, you also, can be an equity investor. So in what criteria would you be an equity investor? Because if we are going to those, East Europe, North Africa, those countries we are not familiar with, we would like to have a equity partner like EBRD, sit beside us. That will make us feel more secure. So can you elaborate more in this regard? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, the first one on the interest rates. There are different operating models that IFIs use. The International Finance Corporation, IFC, and EBRD use, shall we say, the market principle. Okay, so the way these two banks price is simply by looking at each project, determining what the risk of this project is based on country risk, project risk, and so on, and then have a risk margin that it generally is also attractive for private sector banks to co-finance, because we need to remember that all international financial institutions, none of them can provide all the funding by themselves. Yeah? They are required by their constitution to raise funding from somewhere else. Most IFIs, traditional IFIs, raise funding from other subsidized sources. So you have a subsidized funding package. But EBRD and IFC need to raise funding that is market conform. Yeah? So bringing IFC and EBRD into a project does not necessarily mean you get cheaper funding than you would have gotten from commercial banks. But the two advantages that these IFIs can bring is the following. First, let's say in Turkey, the maximum maturity that a Turkish bank can provide, or an international lender for that matter, is in a region of 10 to 12 years. Yeah? Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's a bit longer, depending on market sentiment. But an IFI could provide, as I said, 15, 20-year money, and would also allow or agree with you a back-ended repayment profile for that IFI portion. So on the whole, you get a 15-year loan package that looks pretty straight to you, where the commercial banks are paid off first and the IFIs paid off towards the end stage. Okay, so basically bringing an IFI in extends your maturity. And then secondly, as I said, the risk profile of a project per se reduces dramatically because you have the IFC or the EBRD or whoever in that project, and governments, history shows us that governments are very reluctant to play around with those projects, and particularly waste to energy, feed-in tariffs, all the rest, all these things that you need, the stability that you need to make the investment decision. If you have an IFI and the likelihood of the government saying in 2 years' time, feed-in tariff, I don't care what my predecessor government said, I halve it, that's not really a possibility, because if they default on an IFI loan, yeah, that may have rating implications for the country. So they tend to be very careful there. So these are the two advantages. And then, of course, you have then the other set of IFIs, the Asian Development Bank, in terms of their public sector lending program, that is heavily subsidized. I mean, one can't say it in any other way. There are many other international financial institutions that routinely offer below market rate funding. The European Investment Bank is a famous example of that. They outcompete commercial banks in Germany and in France, yeah, by providing lower margins. But that is not really a sustainable business model in the longer term. Yeah. So I would say, for me, the interesting examples are IFC and EBRD, because they bring in private sector, provide you with the political cover vis-à-vis the host government. Then you asked about equity. Lending is very different from equity. When you are a lender, you assess risks, and you cover against downsides, and you are conservative. When you go into the equity business, you look at the opportunities, and you look at the quality of your partner, the commitment of your partner, and the validity of the business idea. And therefore, when you are in the equity business, the smaller your investment, the better. If you have a huge return on a small investment, that's the perfect way of using your capital. So, when you are in the equity business, you don't necessarily are fixated on minimum sizes, and I only do an equity investment if it's more than 20 million or something like that. You look case by case whether it makes sense. Yeah, and then. In the equity business, in EBRD, I remember that, you sometimes had equities in 1-2 million, because it was in a sense the starting point of a business that had a lot of potential. Then we work a lot with equity funds as well. Yeah? So we provide sort of funds of funds, yeah? Because we feel that in very many sectors, such as energy, yeah, renewables, there are funds that have a very impressive specialized knowledge in that subsector, and rather than an IFI making sort of one-on-one investments, they tend to provide funding to an investment, to an equity vehicle managed by clever people, that then use that money to make sub-investments that are smaller, sometimes bigger. And that's definitely a business model that is also attractive for those more traditional IFIs that feel very nervous going into this high-risk business, but they feel it's okay to provide funding to funds, that have had people with a track record, or funds themselves with a track record. So, when I look at the 16% that EBRD did last year, I would assume that About half is direct equity and the other half is through equity funds.
请问各位来宾还有问题吗？好，Thank you, Mr. Maier.
Thank you.
那我们的座谈会就这边告一段落，谢谢各位的参与。那离开前，麻烦请将你的问卷交到外面的服务台的工作人员，谢谢。那提醒一下，稍后是1对1顾问的咨询时间。 请已获承办人通知的来宾，请前往到国贸大楼5楼511会议室，谢谢。